I should start by saying that I've never really believed in ghosts. Not seriously, anyway. Sure, I grew up on the usual campfire stories, haunted houses, hitchhiking phantoms, that sort of thing. But I've always been the rational one, the skeptic. The guy who ruined scary movies by whispering, "Yeah, but that would never happen." What happened to me in the forest last year changed all of that. It was late September, one of those gray, swollen days when the air feels heavy and the rain lingers like a threat rather than an event. My friend Daniel had been on my case for weeks to join him on a day hike through Pine Hollow Forest. It wasn't far from town, maybe an hour's drive, and he'd been there a handful of times before. He kept saying the trails were beautiful, overlooked, and practically deserted. Looking back, deserted was probably the key word. I wasn't in the best headspace then, too much work stress, too many sleepless nights, so the idea of getting away from everything sounded good. I figured, what's the worst that could happen? A bit of mud, a bit of rain, maybe some sore muscles the next morning. Nothing I couldn't handle. We set off around mid-morning, though the sky was already the color of dirty dishwater. Daniel was his usual upbeat self, practically bouncing as he slung on his pack, while I trudged along with my hood pulled up, trying to keep the drizzle off my glasses. The first stretch wasn't bad. The forest was dense, tall pine pressing together like silent sentinels, their needles dripping steady rivulets of rain. The earth was damp, soft underfoot, and the air smelled sharp, resinous. We walked for maybe 2 hours, talking less and less as the weather thickened. The drizzle became a steady fall, and the wind picked up just enough to make the branches creak overhead. Eventually, Daniel suggested leaving the marked trail. "Shortcut," he said, pointing to a narrower path that curved into the darker part of the forest. "This'll loop us back quicker once the rain really starts." I wasn't thrilled. The main trail was already lonely enough, and something about the shadowed gap between those trees made me uneasy. But I didn't want to be the buzzkill, so I followed him in. That was mistake number one. The deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. Not the natural quiet of wilderness, but a smothering hush, as though even the rain was being swallowed. The path beneath our boots turned to slick mud, sucking at our soles. I noticed how the trees looked older here, gnarled and darker, with bark peeling in long, wet strips. And then the smell hit me. It wasn't pine anymore. It was something heavier, fouler, like soil that had been turned and left to rot, or the inside of a damp cellar. Daniel noticed it too. "Guess stuff dies out here and doesn't rot right," he said, wrinkling his nose. He tried to laugh it off, but it sounded forced. We walked on for maybe another half hour before I realized something strange. I hadn't heard a single bird since we'd left the main trail, not one. No rustle of wings, no distant caw, just the drip of rain and the squelch of mud. And then the first sound, a whisper. At first I thought it was Daniel muttering something under his breath, but when I turned, he was a few paces ahead, silent, shoulders hunched against the rain. The whisper had come from the trees to my right. Low, wet, indistinct. I froze in place, my breath hitching, and scanned the wall of dripping pine. Nothing. No one. Just darkness, layered behind darkness. "Hey," Daniel called back. "You good?" I hesitated. For a second I considered telling him, but I didn't. Instead, I forced a smile and said, "Yeah." Just tired. That was mistake number 2. We pressed deeper into the hollow, the world around us growing darker with every step. The rain hadn't stopped, but it felt different now. not falling on us so much as sliding through us like a chill that seeped into the bones. Daniel tried to keep the mood light, making comments about how wild the forest must have looked centuries ago, how cool it was that nobody else ever hiked this stretch. But I barely listened. My ears strained against the silence, waiting for that whisper again, and then I heard it. Not once, not twice. Constant, a thin thread of words weaving through the rain. Too soft to make out, too steady to be a trick of the weather. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't me. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. A chorus of faint voices pressed just beyond the tree line. "Daniel," I said quietly, catching up to him. "Stop." He turned, his brow furrowing when he saw my face. "What's wrong?" "Listen." We both stood there, heads cocked, breathing shallow. For a moment, only rain. Then, there it was. A hushed murmur, like a crowd gathering just out of sight. Daniel's expression flickered, but he tried to hide it. "Could be wind in the branches." "No," I whispered. "That's not the wind." Before I could say more, something moved between the trees ahead. Not an animal, a figure, pale, thin, human-shaped. It flickered between the trunks as though it had been waiting for us, then slipped from sight. "Did you see?" I began. But Daniel was already walking fast, his shoulders stiff, muttering, "Just a trick of the light." "Don't spook yourself, man," I followed, my heart hammering. Every rational thought told me it had to be a trick. Rain, mist, exhaustion. But my gut screamed otherwise. That figure hadn't been vague like mist. It had form, arms, legs, a face, though blurred and too pale, like wet paper. The whispers followed us, sometimes in front, sometimes behind, once terrifyingly right beside me, as though someone had leaned in close enough to breathe against my ear. I jerked away, spinning, to find nothing but a dark knot of trees and dripping moss. That was when the forest began to feel wrong in a way I can't explain. The trees seemed closer together than before. The path twisted where it shouldn't. I glanced over my shoulder and couldn't even see where we'd entered anymore. Daniel slowed, finally uneasy enough to admit it. Trails, different. Must have crossed a fork. There was no fork, I said. My voice came out sharper than I intended. He didn't answer. The air grew heavier, the smell stronger, like soil churned with stagnant water. I could barely breathe without gagging, and then came the laughter, soft, childlike. It rippled through the trees to our left, cutting through the whispers like a knife. Daniel froze. Okay, that wasn't the wind. The sound came again, higher, closer, a giggle, and then we saw them. Two shapes standing between the trees, small, child-sized, their bodies gray, waterlogged. Their eyes, God, their eyes were nothing but dark hollows that seemed too deep, too endless. The moment Daniel's flashlight beam swept across them, they vanished. We both stood in stunned silence, staring into the empty forest. I think we should go back," Daniel said finally. "No argument here." But when we turned to retrace our steps, the path was gone, not overgrown, not hard to see, gone. Where the trail should have been, there was only a wall of trees, dense and suffocating. That was when I knew, truly knew, that something in Pine Hollow wasn't natural. We weren't lost in the woods. We'd been taken. We stood there staring into the curtain of trees that had replaced the trail. The forest pressed in on us, the rain pounding harder, as if it were urging us deeper instead of letting us go. Daniel swore under his breath, spinning in circles. No, no, no. It was right here. It was right here. I wanted to agree, to force logic into the situation, But the truth clawed at the back of my mind. The forest wasn't behaving like the forest anymore. Paths didn't vanish. Trees didn't shift. Something, or someone, was twisting it around us. The whispers had grown louder, more insistent. They weren't just background noise anymore. They pressed against my skull like thoughts that weren't mine. My name slipped through them once, soft, almost kind. I nearly answered before I caught myself. "Don't talk," I whispered to Daniel. "Don't answer them." He gave me a quick, panicked look, and I realized he'd heard his name too. That was when the shadows began to move. At first, it looked like the trees themselves were swaying, bending unnaturally. But then the darkness peeled away, stretching across the ground like spilled ink. One of them rose up into the shape of a man, tall, thin, its head cocked to the side as if studying us. Daniel lifted his flashlight, and the beam bent. Not broke, not dimmed, bent, as if the shadow absorbed the light and curved it back on itself. "Run!" I hissed. We bolted into the trees, branches clawing at our arms and faces. I didn't care if there was a path anymore. I just knew I had to get away. But the forest didn't let us. No matter which way we turned, the same gnarled tree appeared ahead, twisted like a figure in pain, its trunk split into a yawning mouth. 3 times. 4. Every direction, the same tree. Daniel's voice cracked. "We're trapped." The laughter came again, closer now, circling us. A child's giggle mixed with something deeper, harsher, like 2 voices inside one throat. And then we saw them, not just one, not just 2, dozens. Figures standing in the rain, men, women, children, their bodies pale and rotted, their clothes clinging like they'd drowned. Hollow eyes fixed on us from every angle. I couldn't breathe. My chest locked up. Daniel whispered, "Don't move." But the figures moved for us, slow, uneven, their heads twitching with each step. I couldn't stop shaking. "What do we do?" "They're not solid," Daniel said desperately. "They can't be—" One of them reached him. A woman with hair plastered across her face. Her hand shot out, faster than I thought possible, and grabbed his wrist. Daniel screamed. The flesh around her fingers blackened instantly, spreading up his arm like frostbite. He tore free, stumbling back, clutching his arm. It was real. They could touch us. I grabbed him under the shoulder, dragging him as best I could. "Move! Move!" We barreled through the figures. Cold seeped into me as they brushed past, but I kept running, refusing to look at their faces. Behind us, the whispers had become wails. The forest howled with them, as if the storm itself was alive and furious. We didn't stop until we crashed into a clearing, and in the center of it, a cabin. Run down, boards missing, roof caved in on one side. But it was something. Shelter. Daniel didn't hesitate. He bolted toward it. I followed, though every part of me screamed that running inside would be worse than staying in the rain, because places like that, they don't appear by accident. The cabin loomed in front of us, half swallowed by moss and rot, its roof sagging under the weight of years. Windows were shattered, the door dangling from one hinge. It looked like the kind of place where bad stories end, not where survival begins. But Daniel was already yanking the door open, stumbling inside, clutching his arm where the blackened handprint was spreading up toward his elbow. I hesitated on the threshold. The air inside felt heavier, thicker, like I was standing at the lip of a furnace. My instinct screamed to stay out. But the shadows behind us were closing in, pale faces pushing through the trees. I stepped inside. The floor groaned, threatening to give way beneath my weight. The smell hit me first. Damp wood, mold, and something acrid, metallic, old blood. Daniel collapsed against the wall, his flashlight rolling across the warped boards. The beam cut through the darkness for a second before flickering out completely. "No, no, no!" Daniel banged it against his palm. Nothing. The only light now came from the doorway, where rain poured like a curtain of silver. And then the doorway filled. Shapes moved just beyond the rain, dozens of them. They didn't step in, didn't cross the threshold. They only watched. Daniel let out a trembling laugh. They can't come inside. Maybe we're safe. But I knew better, because the whispers hadn't stopped. They'd gotten clearer. They weren't outside. They were inside the cabin with us. A woman's voice rasped from the corner. "You shouldn't have come." I spun, my heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing but shadow pooled there, thick and unnatural, as if it had substance. Daniel clutched his arm, rocking back and forth. The blackness was climbing higher, creeping toward his shoulder like it wanted him whole. I grabbed his face. "Stay with me!" "Don't listen to them," but he wasn't looking at me anymore. His eyes had gone glassy, fixed on something over my shoulder. I turned and froze. A figure was standing inside the cabin now. Not one of the pale, drowned shapes from the forest. This one was different. A man in tattered robes, his face hidden beneath a hood. His hands long, skeletal, the fingers ending in jagged nails. His presence pressed against me like a weight, crushing the air from my lungs. When he spoke, the sound was inside my head instead of the room. "Leave him." "His soul is already claimed," Daniel screamed, thrashing as the blackness spread across his chest. His veins pulsed dark, his skin graying. I held him tighter. "No, I'm not leaving him." The hooded figure tilted his head as if amused. Then he stepped forward, and the shadows of the cabin stretched with him, swallowing the walls, the ceiling, the floor. For a moment, it felt like we were falling. The cabin was gone. It was only darkness, and Daniel's screams. I don't know how long I fought, pulling him, shouting, clawing against the dark that wanted to devour us both. My nails split, my throat burned, but I refused to let go. Then suddenly, light. I was on the ground outside, the rain soaking my face. The forest was quiet again, empty, but Daniel was gone. The only thing left of him was his backpack, lying in the mud beside me. I crawled toward it, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. Inside were only his water bottle, some trail mix, and his journal. I opened the journal with trembling hands. The last entry was written in a frantic scrawl. "If I don't make it out, don't let them trick you. The cabin isn't real. Nothing in the forest is. If you see me again, it isn't me." I don't remember standing. I don't remember deciding to move. One moment I was kneeling in the mud with Daniel's journal clutched in my hands, and the next I was running. Branches whipped at my face. My soaked clothes clung to my skin, and every breath was fire in my chest. Behind me, the forest was silent, too silent. No footsteps, no whispers, no rustling of the drowned figures. Only the pounding of my own boots against the mud, the drumbeat of my heart, and the storm raging above. But I knew they were there, watching, waiting. Every time I blinked, I saw Daniel's face, twisted, gray, eyes staring at something far away. Every time the lightning lit up the woods, I swore I saw pale bodies just beyond the tree line. I didn't stop running until the trees began to thin and the ground sloped downward. Through the sheets of rain, I saw it, the faint glimmer of a trail marker, civilization, or at least the illusion of it. I stumbled toward it, gripping Daniel's journal so tightly The wet paper threatened to tear in my hands. But as I reached the trail, something shifted. The rain stopped, not slowed, not eased. Stopped. The silence was worse than the storm. The forest seemed to hold its breath. And then I heard it. A whisper. So close it could have been inside my ear. "You left him." I froze, turning in a slow circle. Nothing but the trees, slick and dripping. "You left him. And now you'll come back." I shook my head violently. No, I'm done. I made it out. But the voice wasn't done. "Do you think this is the end? Do you think the forest lets you go? He's ours, and so are you." The trail marker blurred before my eyes, like it was swaying, melting. I staggered backward, blinking. And for a moment I swore it wasn't a marker at all. It was the corner of the cabin rising out of the mud, its sagging roof glistening with rain. I rubbed my eyes hard. When I opened them again, it was just a marker, just a marker. I forced my legs to move, stumbling forward, each step heavier than the last. The voice followed, a hiss threading through the trees, slipping between the rain-slicked branches. "Run! Run as far as you can. It won't matter. The forest is inside you now." I don't remember much after that. Somehow I made it back to the trailhead. Somehow I made it to my car. When I collapsed into the driver's seat, drenched and shaking, the storm finally broke overhead again, thunder rolling, rain slamming against the windshield. I drove without looking back. I don't know how I didn't crash. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, Daniel's journal lying open in the passenger seat. The ink of his last entry had bled from the rain, but the words were still there, jagged and desperate. "If you see me again, it isn't me." I've read that line 100 times since, and I swear, sometimes when I'm half asleep, I hear his voice calling me from outside my apartment window. It sounds just like him, but I know better. At least I think I do.